Okay, since I'm now officially repping it on my chest, yeah, I had to ask myself, man, how in the hell up to this point have I not covered Repo Man? Well, I'm gonna have to make up for that now. All right, so one of my favorite. If I went down the list, okay, we could kind of go back and forth about favorite comedies of the 80s, and mine might differ slightly from most people's. Of course, people are going to be throwing around the inevitable Ghostbusters, which, yeah, it's a funny enough movie. I just been a bit hammered out at this point. It's like, yeah, Ghostbusters. Yeah, seen it 50 times. Don't ever need to see it again. Just amusing enough, but enough. I tend to hedge more toward more screwy, kind of messed up stuff. If you haven't guessed. So this was a movie that I was turned on to by my cousin, and he had gone to see it. It's one of those movies when we lived in the Boston area. Basically, you get the big movies like say Ghostbusters and films like it. Big movies that everybody went to see. Um, and then there were the little movies, the independent movies, semi-independent movies that wouldn't show up in the theaters where I was, say, in Nashua, New Hampshire at the time. And um, for a lot of those, if you wanted to see them, well, they were on their first run. You might get to see them if you rode into Boston. You go into Boston and see those, and later on, late 80s, going into the 90s, I went to Boston to see a lot of things that I couldn't see where I was. I was out living in the southern New Hampshire suburbs, and we were just getting basically all the cheeseburger and a Coke movies. And so, it's Boston, the little theaters around Boston would be a great source of going to these indie flicks and these kind of weird showings and whatnot. And it's not the first place I went and saw Rocky Horror, but it was the first place I went and saw Rocky Horror with a full cast performing up front. That was so much fun, I can't even tell you. But Repo Man came out in 1984, and I wasn't going to Boston around that point in time. I was just kind of stuck in New Hampshire, just kind of barely managing my life. And my cousin, who was kind of getting wheels under him, he was kind of part of the he's kind of becoming part of the Boston punk scene at that point, and he went to see it, and it kicked his ass. He and I were basically both a couple of young metalheads, and at some point, a couple of young metalheads in the late '70s, early '80s, and at some point, around about 83, 84, it was just like, yeah, I don't know if I can sit through another 5 minute party all night song when I'm not partying all night. In fact, I'm pretty damn depressed with where my life is going right now. And what we found was we originally rejected punk, for the most part. There were bands that I always liked. I always liked the Ramones. I always liked the B-52s. So there were small, but largely it was just these guys suck and they can't play, and just And eventually it was just like, we were just like, hey, wait a minute, what were we missing with this punk stuff? And it was just like when suddenly bands like the Sex Pistols and the Stooges and Johnny Thunders and the Heartbreakers really started clicking with us. And it was like, oh yeah, this is actually pretty good. And around that time, my cousin went and caught Repo Man in Boston where you could actually see it. And so he told me about it, and he's just like, "You gotta see this movie." And so I didn't. He sent me stuff from the soundtrack, and the soundtrack kicked ass. And it was just, when you listen to this record, it's just like uh, an LA punk primer. I mean, you had the Circle Jerks, you had Circle Jerks, you had Black Flag, the Plugs, Suicidal Tendencies, and it just turned me on to a whole new. It just kind of rewired my brain in a lot of ways. Not those specific songs, but they were kind of part and parcel with the transition or the transformation I was going through. And lo and behold, several months later, because the movie did not do all that well, it came to cable. And so I remember I was kind of hip to what this movie was all about. And it was like, my cousin was telling me, yeah, this isn't like Nicolas Cage and Valley Girl with a flock of seagulls haircut. This is like, real dangerous, nasty punks who were like robbing gas stations and stuff like that. You know, the lead character is, just really kind of negative and pissy and shitty and doesn't have a lot of nice dialogue and doesn't have a lot of redeeming qualities. And I was kind of like, okay, that's cool. I'm kind of there for that. I'm kind of down with that. And so eventually I got to see that. My brother was kind of along for that ride. My stepdad, R.I.P. Was there for this, and he was just sitting there watching the whole thing, and I was laughing my ass off. He was just sitting there shaking his head, and he was just like, "What kind of movie is this?" And boy, what kind of movie is this? Is exactly the kind of movie I'm into. And so this knocked me on my ass. I loved it. Directed by written and directed by Alex Cox. As far as cast goes, it's Emilio Estevez playing the lead character Otto. Is just an aimless young punk in a group of punks, and he gets kind of tricked into stealing a car by Harry Dean Stanton, and who plays the character Bud, who is a repo man, and basically, after successfully stealing this car where the payments were due or whatever, he he has kind of more or less been impressed into the repossession business, and finds out he can kind of make money on commission, you know, boosting these cars from people who aren't paying their bills or whatever. So this is what happens. Kind of the big thing. The big thing goes on as the movie happens is there's a Chevy Malibu roving around, driven by this guy who's half out of his mind. He's played by Fox Harris, who at the time was a big part of Alex Cox's stable, along with some of the other folks in this movie. Cy Richardson, who's terrific. Dickie Rude. Jennifer Balgobin has popped up in a couple of his movies. Just or has she? She may have, but several of those, and just a great bunch of kick-ass actors, and man. Anyway, Otto. There's kind of a thing for the repo companies to go after this Chevy Malibu. They want it back, and Otto, in looking for the car, kind of falls in with this UFO cult, and you find out that this guy this guy played by Fox Harris, who's driving around the Chevy Malibu, is half out of his mind from radiation, and he's just driving with like sunglasses with one of the lenses out, and he's just babbling incoherently, and he's just addled all to hell, and he's basically dying from the radiation. And because there are these apparently aliens in the trunk of the car, and he has stolen these aliens for this UFO cult, and everybody's after the Malibu. The feds are after the Malibu. Rival repo companies are after the Malibu, and all kind of chaos erupts around this. And this is great. They have like federal agents who are all running around, and they're basically kind of like the big bad guys. And it's funny. There's a whole gag in the movie about generic food. They show all. You can remember, particularly popular in the 80s. They're still around, but it was like so ubiquitous in the 80s, where you would go to a grocery store and you'd see food that was generic and it had a generic label. And so all the food in this movie, basically you see it's all in cans or bags or whatever, labeled this or that. It's like generic food. It's like food or drink, beer, and he'll be eating out of this little canister, and it says like beef on it or something like that. It's all generic. And then all these federal agents all kind of unilaterally have like this god awful wavy blonde coif, this wavy blonde hair. They're all generic too, and that's kind of the skewed mentality with which this movie is infused. Man, but yeah, at the same time, there's a vicious, cruel kind of nihilism that's really kind of at the core of Repo Man. And it's in these places where, I don't know, it just like at one point, another kind of Alex Cox stalwart at that time was Xander Schloss, who you might know as he's done a lot of things. He's played with Joe Strummer, but he's also primarily been the bassist for the Circle Jerks. And he plays like Otto's dorky friend, and who kind of disappears midway through the movie. You don't know whatever happened to him. And then next time you see him, it's like they're searching a hospital. They're searching around the morgue, and there's a stretcher with a sheet over it. And they're trying to find somebody particular, which I won't tell you how that goes. But they pull open the sheet on this got this body that's weighing outside the morgue, and it's Xander Schloss. And he's lying there just beaten up, and his glasses are all messed up, and he just groans. He looks up, he says, Otto. And they throw the sheet back over him and keep walking. That's the kind of movie this is. Yeah, there's another point where Otto is like cradling this guy who's been killed, who was like an old childhood friend of his, who had been through a lot of stuff. And he's just like, yeah, I know a life of crime led me to this, and just like, no, you're gonna be okay. And then he starts choking and bleeding, and Otto looks at him and says, well, maybe not, and then drops him and leaves. And there's just a mindset going into that that's kind of brilliant and beautiful. I just think it works really well. But yeah, this is probably my favorite comedy of the 80s. I just, you don't ever see me doing these top 10 lists or anything like that. I really don't believe in them. And yeah, just anything I try to line up like that is going to change every 5 minutes. But man, Repo Man's a big one. Uh, and I think you would be remiss in your duties as a movie fan if you didn't go see this one.